Ms. Pasulka again, and in this video I'm going to talk about a bunch of other supplement essays, including the Buzzword essays, creative essays, the Stanford roommate letter, short essay prompts, optional essays, and inscrutable prompts, otherwise known as prompts that make you want to go, huh? So first let's talk about the Buzzword essays. It used to be that every college wanted you to write an essay about diversity. So you'll still see some diversity prompts, but most buzzword essays these days are about leadership. So expect to write a few leadership essays. Now, a couple of tips for this essay, or this type of essay. First, don't just talk about the first thing that comes to mind when you say the buzzword. Now, for example, in most people's mind, diversity is connected to racial diversity. And maybe you have a lot to say about racial diversity or another type of demographic diversity, and it's where you're going to find your essay. But open the definition a little first just to make sure. For example, one of the best diversity essays I've ever read was by an African American student who, although he was very grateful for the experience he'd had in a diverse high school and in a diverse neighborhood, he realized sometime in his junior year that he'd had very little exposure to people who thought differently from him politically. So, on his own, he sought out and read books by conservative black thinkers because he'd just never heard that opinion before. And he wrote his essay about that. Similarly, when people hear the word leadership, they automatically think about somebody who delegates to others and does the cleanup in aisle 4 when the whole project goes downhill because other people aren't pulling their own weight. But there are many other ways to think about leadership. For example, one student wrote an essay about her grandmother who somehow managed to pull together everybody in the family for every major holiday or celebration and managed to smooth over all the arguments so that their family had a sort of, some kind of cohesion and continuity. One student wrote she was an introvert and she wrote her essay about basically the stereotype that only extroverts can be good leaders. Whatever you do in this essay, just don't keep hitting them over the head with the buzzword. In fact, shoot for not using the buzzword at all, because then that can give the impression that you're only kind of spitting back to the admissions office what you think they want to hear. Instead, you just want to reflect sincerely on your thoughts and your experiences and your character with with regard to whatever the buzzword is, and just let the essay grow naturally from that. Next, creative essays. Now, more and more colleges are using creative essays, but the University of Chicago is the originator, and hands down, they write the best creative essays or choose the best creative prompts because a lot of them are inspired by former applicants. Now, just a few examples of their prompts if you're unfamiliar with them. There was one that was, the world is divided into two sets of people. What are those two different types of people? What's so odd about odd numbers? Tell us about your arch nemesis. And there was something about mustard in there one year. And now they let you write either the prompts for this year or their entire cache of past prompts. So, you really have to sit down and weed out the prompts before you even start to write the essay. Now, the number one thing to do with these prompts is to ask yourself first, what are other people writing for this prompt? There was a year, I think it was like 7 or 8 years ago, that the prompt was, "Where's Waldo?" That was the prompt. And of the students I saw that year, 90% wanted to write that prompt. 99% of the students who wrote that prompt wrote about Waldo, the cartoon character with the red and white striped hat that you're looking for. 90% of those students kind of segued into a philosophical discussion of looking for yourself and your identity. And then half of those kind of concluded with something about finding themselves at the University of Chicago. Now, one of the essays for the prompt that year that they still talk about at the University of Chicago is the student who wrote the essay, "Where's Waldo?" as in, why is no one in America named Waldo anymore? And then proceeded to talk about German immigration. And you hear that and you think, I would have never thought of that. And that is exactly the expression that you want the University of Chicago admissions officer to have when he or she reads your essay. So first, think about what other people are writing about the prompt and then write something else. Now, the other important thing about that type of essay is that it's a supplement essay. It's not a second personal essay. So think of this essay as less about you and your experiences and more about your brain. How do the synapses in your brain fire? Do the synapses in your brain fire in a particularly creative or a particularly thoughtful way? Next, let's talk about the Stanford roommate letter. No offense to Stanford, but this is one of my least favorite essay prompts. I think Stanford started asking this question about 10 years ago, but more and more colleges are now adopting some version of it. And the main thing to remember about this essay/letter is that it's a theoretical letter to a roommate that's really a letter to an admissions officer. So first, be aware of that and don't go deep slang or keep repeating dude or bro or fam or whatever you kids say these days. Second, find just a few things to focus on. Don't just make it a long list of your quirks. Third, I presume that they're asking this question to weed out people who are going to go to class for 4 years and study and otherwise never interact with another living human being on campus. So, if you like to spend time with other people, just try to look ahead to your time in college and imagine the kind of camaraderie and the types of activities that you like to do with your roommate and the people in your dorm. And finally, even though it's not a true letter, try to give some indication that you plan to have reciprocal relationships with your roommate and other students. Don't just throw it out there that you're the worst singer in the world or you're the messiest human alive and your roommate is just going to have to deal with that. Maybe ask your roommate a couple of questions about themselves or at least show that you have a natural curiosity about other people and the person that you're writing to. Next, short answers. These really stymie some students. Now, many schools have prompts that you need to answer when I'm talking about short answers, it's the prompts that need to be answered in between 5 to 50 words usually. Usually the questions are things like books you've read or music you listen to, but sometimes they're more open, like what inspires you. So I have a few tips for this, I guess I have a few tips for everything. So number 1, always just be honest and, be yourself and give honest answers. Number 2, look at these questions in the context of the rest of your application. So for example, if you're really into playing hockey and your whole application reflects that, when they ask what you read, you can skip all the hockey books and hockey websites and hockey magazines and just use the space to highlight other interests. And last, some colleges ask for a literal list. And in that case, you just want to give them what they're looking for. But the danger in doing that is that the reader might just skim and look for books that they've read or that they know, and they might miss some really important information about you. So if you have more freedom in the essay, just give a little context to the list. For example, you could say, I like books on Polish, World War II history, like A Question of Honor or A Story of a Secret State. But I also keep up with the books that my mom's book club is reading, like Where the Crawdads Sing or The Great Believers. And then I also like to read all the typical young adult dystopian novels that everyone else is reading. Now, do you see how that gives just a little bit more personality and gives just a little bit more information about you? And that's what you're trying to do on any question, no matter how small on the application. Just let them in a little bit more into your life. Finally, if you're asked to describe yourself in 3 words, you do not have to use adjectives. You can use a phrase, you can use nouns, you can use verbs. At the very least, really think about the adjectives that you're using so it's not the same hardworking, dedicated, curious trifecta that everybody else is using. Next, optional essays. Optional essays aren't really optional. If you leave it blank, it sends the message that you don't really care about that school enough to trouble yourself to write that essay. Now, I'm not talking about the additional information section on the Common App. If you have no more to say about that section, it's fine to leave it blank. And last but not least, the essays that make you want to go, huh? Now, through this whole process, you will run into essay prompts that you don't understand. It's more common when you're in the outside scholarship phase, but even some admissions offices produce illogical or kind of impossible to answer prompts. Usually when they're trying to mash like a University of Chicago type creative prompt with the school's mission statement, and then it's just a mess. So in that case, try to just reword the question into something that's just a little bit more answerable without getting too far from the prompt. And then just give it the best answer that you can, just like with your other essays. You just want to be careful that while you're rephrasing it or rewording it, you're not completely turning it. So you're not getting so far away from the prompt that they think that you've just kind of cut and pasted an essay or a prompt from another college, and that you've totally ignored the essay that they want you to write. So that's all my tips. If you think of other supplement essays that you run into that you'd like a few tips for, just email me and I'll try to answer those. Next up, the activities list and the additional information section.